My name is Madison Bradley, and until I was 28 years old, I thought I knew what family meant. Every Sunday dinner was sacred in our home until the night my father looked me in the eyes and said, "Consider yourself a stranger in this house." My mother turned away, my brother froze, and just like that, I was kicked out of the only family I'd ever known. All because I dared to live my own truth. Before I tell you how I rebuilt my life from the ashes of that devastating night, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button to join me on this journey of betrayal, resilience, and finding family in unexpected places. Growing up, my family seemed picture perfect from the outside. My father, Roger Bradley, was a respected accountant with his own firm in our small Connecticut town. My mother, Diana, devoted herself to being the consummate homemaker and community volunteer. My younger brother Ryan, for years my junior, was the star athlete who could do no wrong. And I was Madison, the perfect daughter, straight-A student, class president, and later, the finance executive who made my father proud by following in his footsteps. Our Sunday dinners were non-negotiable family time. Every week, rain or shine, holiday or workday the next morning, we gathered around my mother's antique oak table at precisely 5 p.m. The menu rarely varied: pot roast on the first Sunday, baked chicken on the second, my father's grilled steaks on the third, and my mother's lasagna on the fourth. If there was a fifth Sunday in the month, we'd go to my grandmother's house instead. Family is everything, my father would toast at every dinner. Without family, you have nothing. The irony of those words wasn't lost on me that final Sunday. For 28 years, I'd played my role perfectly. I'd gone to my father's alma mater, majored in business as expected, taken the corporate job they approved of, dated the men they found suitable. I'd shown up every Sunday with a bottle of wine and compliments for my mother's cooking. I'd listened to my father's lectures about responsibility and tradition without argument. But inside, I'd been slowly dying. The truth was, I hated corporate finance. The endless meetings about maximizing shareholder value when all I could think about was the environmental impact of the companies we invested in. The cutthroat politics that rewarded stepping on others. The soul-crushing fluorescent lighting and constant anxiety. For years, I'd been secretly dreaming of starting my own business, an ethical fashion company that would use sustainable materials and fair labor practices. And then my grandmother died. My mother's mother had always been different from the rest of our rigid family. She'd traveled the world, started businesses, loved and lost passionately. In her final years, she'd grown close to me, recognizing perhaps a kindred spirit beneath my perfect daughter facade. When she passed 6 months before that fateful dinner, she left me a substantial inheritance with a letter that read simply, "Live your truth, Madison." I never did until it was almost too late. The money gave me the freedom to finally make my move. I quit my job, started developing my business plan, and began setting up my ethical fashion company. I also started dating Jasper, a kind and brilliant graphic designer who my parents immediately disapproved of because he was a creative without a real job and came from a different cultural background than our Wast family. The weeks leading up to that Sunday dinner had been tense. My mother had made several comments about hasty decisions and phases during our phone calls. My father had emailed me articles about the failure rates of small businesses. Ryan had texted warnings that our parents were upset about something big. Still, I'd been naive enough to think that once I explained my business plan and showed them how much thought I'd put into it, they would support me. I'd even brought a presentation folder with market research and financial projections to dinner, thinking my father at least would appreciate the thoroughness. As I pulled into the familiar driveway that Sunday afternoon, the house looked the same as it always had. The perfect colonial with its manicured lawn and tasteful landscaping. My mother's herb garden thriving along the kitchen side. My father's prized rosebushes flanking the front walkway. But something felt different the moment I stepped inside. The usual warm greeting from my mother was replaced with a distracted nod as she remained fixated on stirring something on the stove. My father, typically in his armchair reading the paper, was standing by the fireplace, stiff and formal as if greeting a business associate rather than his daughter. He didn't offer the customary hug. Only Ryan seemed normal, giving me a quick embrace and whispering, "Brace yourself," in my ear before pulling away. The familiar smells of my mother's cooking roast beef, garlic mashed potatoes, fresh rolls, contrasted sharply with the cold reception. I placed the bottle of wine I'd brought on the counter and my mother barely acknowledged it. "That's nice, dear," she said without looking at the label, though she usually made a show of appreciating my selections. I set my presentation folder on the side table, straightened my shoulders, and tried to ignore the knot forming in my stomach. Something was very wrong, but I still had no idea just how dramatically my life was about to change. Dinner began with an awkward silence broken only by the clinking of silverware against my mother's best china. My father, seated at the head of the table as always, methodically cut his roast beef without looking up. My mother, normally chatty about neighborhood gossip or church events, focused intensely on rearranging the food on her plate. Ryan, across from me, kept shooting nervous glances between our parents and me. "The potatoes are delicious, Mom," I offered, trying to ease the tension. "Thank you," she replied curtly, still not meeting my eyes. After several more failed attempts at small talk, I decided to just dive into my news. Perhaps once they heard how excited and prepared I was, the strange mood would lift. "So, I have some exciting news to share," I began, reaching for my presentation folder on the nearby sideboard. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about my career path, and I've decided to start my own business. It's an ethical fashion company that will use sustainable materials and fair labor practices. I've done extensive market research and financial projections." "Put that away," my father interrupted, finally looking up from his plate. His voice was cold in a way I'd never heard directed at me before. "We already know what you've done." The silence that followed was deafening. My hand froze halfway to my folder. "What do you mean?" I asked, though a sinking feeling in my stomach told me this was about more than my career change. My mother stood abruptly and walked to her purse on the counter. She returned with several folded papers which she placed beside my plate without a word. I opened them to find printed bank statements, my bank statements showing the transfer of my grandmother's inheritance into a new business account. "How did you get these?" I whispered, shock and violation washing over me. "Your grandmother's lawyer is a family friend," my father said flatly. "He was concerned about the large transfers and contacted me. Though I notice you conveniently neglected to tell us about either the inheritance or your plans for it." "I was going to tell you tonight," I protested. "I wanted to have everything organized so you could see this as a serious business plan, not some impulsive." "Serious?" My father's voice rose as he slapped his hand on the table, making the dishes jump. "You call throwing away an excellent career to sell what, hemp dresses? That's serious to you?" "It's sustainable fashion, Dad, and yes, it's very serious. I've spent months developing the business plan." "The market for ethical." "The market," he scoffed. "What do you know about markets? You've worked for 6 years in a company where everything was handed to you because of my connections. And this is how you repay me?" "Nothing was handed to me," I said, feeling heat rise in my cheeks. "I worked incredibly hard." "Not as hard as I did to build our family's reputation," he cut in again. "A reputation you seem determined to throw away, along with your education and career." My mother finally spoke, her voice quavering. "Madison, we're just concerned about you. First this business idea, then that man you've been seeing." "Jasper?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "What does he have to do with anything?" "We've seen your social media," my mother said, producing more papers, printouts of my private Instagram posts with Jasper. "He's not the kind of person this family associates with." The violation of my privacy hit me like a physical blow. "You've been monitoring my social media? And my bank accounts? Who does that?" "Parents who care about their daughter throwing her life away," my father shouted, standing up now. "You've always been the sensible one, Madison. What's happened to you? Is it this boy? Has he filled your head with these ridiculous ideas?" "These are my ideas," I said, standing too, no longer able to contain my anger. "My business. my life. And Jasper supports me because he respects me as an independent person with my own dreams, which is more than I can say for you right now. How dare you speak to us this way, my mother gasped. After everything we've done for you. What have you done except try to control every aspect of my life? The words poured out before I could stop them, years of suppressed feelings finally breaking free. I've spent my entire life trying to be the perfect daughter, and it's never been enough. I'm 28 years old. I have the right to make my own choices. My father's face had turned an alarming shade of red. Not while you're a member of this family, you don't. This family has standards, traditions, values. Values like invading my privacy? Like judging someone you've never even met because he's different? Those values? I was shaking now, but couldn't stop. Grandma told me to live my truth. That's all I'm trying to do. At the mention of my grandmother, something in my father snapped. He threw his napkin down on the table and pointed at the door. Your grandmother was a troublemaker who never respected tradition, and you're turning out just like her, he spat. If you want to throw away everything we've built for you, fine. But you'll do it without our support. Consider yourself a stranger in this house from now on. The words hit me like physical blows. I looked to my mother, expecting her to intervene, to calm him down as she had during so many of his outbursts over the years. Instead, she turned away, tears streaming down her face, and said nothing. Ryan half rose from his chair, his expression horrified, but a glare from our father froze him in place. Dad, you can't mean that, I said, my voice suddenly small. I've never been more serious in my life, he replied coldly. You've made your choice. Now live with it. Get out of my house. In a daze, I grabbed my purse and the presentation folder that now seemed so naive. As I moved toward the door on unsteady legs, my father delivered his parting shot. Don't expect any financial or emotional support from this family going forward, Madison. You're on your own. My mother remained turned away, shoulders shaking with silent sobs but offering no defense. Only Ryan met my eyes as I left, whispering I'll call you as I passed his chair. I walked out of my childhood home with my father's words ringing in my ears, consider yourself a stranger. 28 years of being the perfect daughter, erased in an instant because I dared to want something different for my life. As I closed the door behind me, I had no idea if it would ever open for me again. I made it exactly 3 miles from my parents' house before I had to pull over. The tears came so hard and fast that I couldn't see the road anymore. I sat in my car on the shoulder of Route 7, the same road I'd driven countless times between home and my apartment, and sobbed until I could barely breathe. My phone buzzed repeatedly in my purse. Through blurred vision, I saw Ryan's name pop up again and again. Text messages, missed calls, voicemails. I couldn't bring myself to answer. What could he possibly say that would make any of this better? Then came a single text from my mother, please return your house key when convenient. Not, are you okay? Not, your father didn't mean it. Just a request to return the physical symbol of my access to their lives, as if I were a fired employee rather than their daughter. I don't remember driving to Amelia's apartment. My best friend since college took one look at my face when she opened the door and pulled me into a fierce hug. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out, she said as she guided me to her couch. The story poured out of me in jagged fragments between sobs, the bank statements, the social media monitoring, my father's red face as he banished me, my mother's devastating silence. Amelia listened without interruption, passing tissues and squeezing my hand when words failed me. You can stay here as long as you need, she said when I finally ran out of words. The guest room is yours. The next days passed in a blur of grief unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't just the loss of my parents' support that devastated me, but the realization that their love had apparently been conditional all along. 28 years of being told family is everything, only to discover that I wasn't actually included in that definition unless I lived exactly as they dictated. I tried calling my parents multiple times. My father's cell went straight to voicemail. The house phone rang unanswered. My mother's cell eventually blocked my number. Ryan managed a few furtive texts, but they were clearly sent in secret. Dad's still furious. Mom cries but won't stand up to him. I'm so sorry, Mads. They've forbidden me from talking to you. This sucks. They're telling people you've chosen a destructive path. Whatever that means. That last text sent me searching social media, where I found my mother's Facebook post that nearly made me vomit. Sometimes the hardest part of being a parent is watching your child make choices that go against everything you've taught them. Please pray for our family during this difficult time. The comments were worse, dozens of sympathetic responses from family, friends and church members, all assuming the worst about me without knowing anything about what had actually happened. Staying strong in your values is so important. Praying for Madison to find her way back to the right path. Children today have no respect for tradition or family. You raised her right, Diana. This is not your fault. My cousin Bethany messaged me directly, I can't believe you'd hurt Aunt Diana and Uncle Roger like this. They've given you everything. I deleted my social media accounts that night. Worse than the family fallout was the creeping realization that my parents' rejection was affecting every aspect of my life. The business I'd been so excited about now felt tainted by their disapproval. Instead of working on my launch plan, I spent days in bed in Amelia's guest room, unable to face the world. Jasper tried to be supportive, but he couldn't truly understand. He came from a large, boisterous family where disagreements were loud but quickly forgotten, where unconditional love was actually unconditional. The concept of being disowned was foreign to him. They'll come around, he kept saying. Just give them time. But as weeks stretched into months with no contact, even his optimism faltered. Our relationship, still relatively new, buckled under the weight of my grief and his helplessness to fix it. When he received an opportunity to work on a major design project in Seattle, I encouraged him to take it. Our goodbye was gentle but final, another loss in a season of losses. 3 months after that Sunday dinner, I finally moved out of Amelia's guest room and into a small apartment I could afford on my dwindling savings. The inheritance that had once represented freedom now felt like a burden of responsibility I wasn't sure I could carry. My business remained more concept than reality, my motivation crushed under the weight of rejection. The approaching holiday season only intensified my sense of isolation. Thanksgiving loomed like a specter, the first in my life I wouldn't spend at my parents' table. I declined Amelia's invitation to join her family, unable to bear witnessing someone else's functional family dynamics. Instead, I spent the day alone in my apartment with a microwave turkey dinner and a bottle of wine. At 8:37 p.m., my phone lit up with a text from Ryan, a photo of our family's Thanksgiving table. My usual place setting was conspicuously absent, the table reset for 3 instead of 4. No message accompanied the photo, but none was needed. I was being erased. Christmas was even worse. A week before the holiday, I returned home to find a cardboard box outside my apartment door. No note, no return address, but I recognized my mother's handwriting on the label. Inside were my childhood mementos, participation trophies, school photos, the teddy bear I'd had since infancy. Things too personal to throw away but too painful for them to keep. My history, boxed up and returned like unwanted merchandise. That night, as I sorted through the physical artifacts of a life that no longer seemed to exist, I found something tucked into my high school yearbook. My grandmother's letter about the inheritance, which I'd thought was lost during the move. Reading her words again hit differently now. Live your truth, Madison. I never did until it was almost too late. Don't make my mistake. There will be people who don't understand, who might even reject you for it. But the only path that leads to real happiness is the one true to your own heart. I'm leaving you this money because I believe in your dreams more than I ever believed in my own. Honor me by being braver than I was. As I clutched that letter on my apartment floor on Christmas Eve, surrounded by the discarded pieces of my former identity, I reached my lowest point. Maybe my parents were right. Maybe I was being selfish and irresponsible. Maybe I should give up this business fantasy, get another corporate job, find a suitable boyfriend, and beg my parents to take me back into the fold. The phone rang, startling me from my spiral of self-doubt. An unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something compelled me to pick up. Madison? It's Ruth Simmons, your grandmother's friend. I hope you don't mind me calling so late on Christmas Eve, but I've been thinking about you and wondered how you're doing with the business Elizabeth was so excited about. Ruth. I remembered her from my grandmother's funeral, a stylish woman in her 70s who had been my grandmother's best friend and business partner in their younger days. It's complicated, I found myself saying, and then, to my surprise, the whole story came pouring out to this virtual stranger. Ruth listened in silence until I finished, then said words that would change everything. Did you know your grandmother was disowned by her family too? For starting her first business instead of being a proper housewife. Elizabeth never told you because she didn't want to color your relationship with your parents. But she went through exactly what you're experiencing now. As Christmas Eve turned into Christmas morning, Ruth shared the story of my grandmother's parallel journey, the family rejection, the struggle to believe in herself, the eventual building of a chosen family of friends and supporters. She told me how my grandmother had ultimately built a successful life on her own terms, and how her biological family had eventually come around, though the relationship was never quite the same. Your grandmother believed in you for a reason, Madison, Ruth said as our call finally wound down near dawn. I'd like to as well. I have some connections in the sustainable fashion world. Let me mentor you a bit, if you're open to it. For the first time in months, I felt something like hope stirring in my chest. Not everything was lost. Not everyone had abandoned me. And maybe, just maybe, I could still honor my grandmother's faith in me. January arrived with bitter cold and an emptiness that seemed to echo through my small apartment. 3 months had passed since that devastating Sunday dinner, and the initial shock had given way to a dull, persistent ache. The business I'd been so passionate about remained stalled, existing primarily as a logo and business plan rather than an actual company. Each time I tried to work on it, my father's dismissive words would replay in my mind. Hemp dresses, what do you know about markets? My temporary housing situation with Amelia had grown increasingly strained despite her unwavering support. I could see the worry in her eyes when she thought I wasn't looking, her concern when I'd spend entire weekends in pajamas staring at the TV. Moving into my own place had given her relief but left me even more isolated. Jasper and I tried to maintain our relationship long distance after his move to Seattle, but our video calls grew shorter and less frequent. The final conversation came on a snowy evening in mid-January. I don't think I can do this anymore, Maddie, he said, his face pixelated on my laptop screen. I care about you so much, but I don't know how to help you through this. It feels like you're drowning and pulling me under too. I couldn't even argue. He deserved better than the hollow shell I'd become. We ended things with mutual sadness rather than anger, another loss I added to the growing pile. With each passing week, the silence from my family became more pronounced. My attempts at reconciliation, emails, letters, even a desperate drive-by of the house, were met with nothing. The one time I'd gathered the courage to park across from my childhood home, I'd seen my mother through the window, noticed her seeing me, and watched as she deliberately closed the curtains. Ryan's communications had dwindled to occasional cryptic texts, always sent during his lunch break when our parents couldn't monitor his phone. They're still mad, but I think softening a little. Dad mentioned your name without getting angry yesterday. Progress? Mom found your old sweater and cried. She misses you but won't admit it. These breadcrumbs of hope only made the silence more painful. I was Schrodinger's daughter, simultaneously family and stranger, loved and rejected, missed and forgotten. February brought Valentine's Day decorations that mocked my solitude and a bank statement that couldn't be ignored. My savings were dwindling faster than expected. The inheritance remained mostly untouched in the business account I'd set up, but I'd promised myself I wouldn't use it for personal expenses. That money was for building something meaningful, not simply surviving. I reluctantly began applying for jobs, not in finance, as that felt too much like crawling back to my father's world, but administrative positions that might pay the bills while I figured out what remained of my dreams. The interviews were exercises in humiliation, explaining why I'd left a prestigious position without having another lined up. I could see the judgment in the interviewers' eyes, the subtle shift when they decided I was unreliable. By March, I had reached what felt like rock bottom. Still unemployed, increasingly isolated, and haunted by the approaching Easter holiday, another family celebration I would miss. Social media, which I'd cautiously rejoined, became a torture device, filled with friends' family photos and spring celebration plans. The final blow came when Ryan, breaking his pattern of secrecy, called me directly one evening. "Mads, I'm so sorry," he said, his voice tight with emotion. "I just found out Mom and Dad have been telling the extended family that you stole Grandma's inheritance money. Aunt Patricia asked me if it was true that you'd taken money that was meant to be split among all the grandkids." The accusation knocked the wind from my lungs. "That's a complete lie. Grandma left that money specifically to me, with a letter explaining why." "I know, I believe you," Ryan assured me. "But they're rewriting the narrative. Dad's telling people you've had some kind of breakdown, that you're being manipulated by bad influences. They're poisoning everyone against you." After we hung up, I ransacked my apartment looking for my grandmother's letter, the only proof I had of her intentions. It wasn't in my files, my desk, my bedside table. With mounting panic, I remembered seeing it last on Christmas Eve, among the childhood mementos my mother had returned. I dumped the box onto my living room floor, frantically sifting through yearbooks and baby photos until I found it, still tucked into my high school yearbook. Reading it again, the words seemed to burn with new significance. "I'm leaving you this money because I believe in your dreams more than I ever believed in my own. Honor me by being braver than I was." But even as I clutched this validation, a wave of defeat washed over me. What was the point? I'd lost my family, my relationship, my career momentum, and now my reputation was being systematically destroyed by the people who were supposed to love me most. Perhaps it would be easier to just give up, return what remained of the inheritance with an apology, and beg my parents to accept me back on their terms. I sat on my apartment floor surrounded by the scattered pieces of my former life and wept, not the dramatic sobs of those first days after being disowned, but the quiet, exhausted tears of someone who has fought too long and is considering surrender. The phone rang, cutting through my moment of despair. Unknown number. Probably another bill collector. I almost didn't answer, but some small spark of hope made me reach for it. "Is this Madison Bradley?" an unfamiliar elderly voice asked. "Yes," I replied cautiously. "This is Ruth Simmons, your grandmother Elizabeth's friend. We spoke briefly at her funeral, and then on Christmas Eve. I hope you don't mind me calling so late." Ruth. The stylish older woman who had shared stories of my grandmother at the funeral. I vaguely remembered exchanging numbers, but had been too deep in grief both for my grandmother and my family's situation to follow up. "Of course I remember you, Mrs. Simmons." "Ruth, please," she corrected gently. "I've been thinking about you and wondering how that business of yours is coming along. Elizabeth was so excited about your plans." The kindness in her voice broke something open in me, and to my embarrassment, I began crying again. "I'm sorry, it's just, everything's fallen apart. My family, the business, everything." There was a pause, then Ruth spoke with quiet determination. "I'm coming over. Text me your address. This isn't a conversation for the telephone." 2 hours later, I sat across from Ruth at my tiny kitchen table, a pot of tea between us. In person, she was even more impressive than I remembered: silver hair in an elegant bob, impeccable posture, eyes sharp with intelligence and warmth. She listened without interruption as I poured out the whole story: the disastrous dinner, the months of silence, the accusations, my dwindling resources and hope. When I finished, she reached across the table and took my hand in her cool, dry one. "Did you know your grandmother was disowned by her family too?" I stared at her, uncomprehending. "What? No, she never mentioned anything like that." Ruth nodded. "She wouldn't have. She didn't want to color your relationship with your parents. But when she was about your age, she decided to start an interior design business instead of being the proper doctor's wife her family expected. Her father cut her off completely. Called her selfish, irresponsible. Sound familiar? As Ruth spoke, pieces of my grandmother that had never quite made sense fell into place. Her fierce independence, her somewhat distant relationship with my mother, her special interest in my dreams and ambitions. Elizabeth went through exactly what you're experiencing now, Ruth continued. The family rejection, the struggle to believe in herself. We became friends during that time, both of us building businesses when women weren't supposed to do such things. She created her own family of friends and supporters. Eventually, her biological family came around, though the relationship was never quite the same. My mom never mentioned any of this, I said, trying to reconcile this new information with the grandmother I thought I'd known. Your mother was very young when the reconciliation happened. Elizabeth chose not to burden her with the past. But she recognized something of herself in you, Madison. That's why she left you that inheritance. She wanted to give you the freedom she had to fight so hard for. Ruth stayed until nearly dawn, sharing stories of my grandmother I'd never heard, her early business struggles, her resilience, her eventual success. As she prepared to leave, she turned to me with an unexpected offer. Your grandmother believed in you for a reason, Madison. I'd like to as well. I have some connections in the sustainable fashion world from my years in the industry. Let me mentor you a bit, if you're open to it. For the first time in months, I felt something like hope stirring in my chest. Not everything was lost. Not everyone had abandoned me. And maybe, just maybe, I could still honor my grandmother's faith in me. As Ruth hugged me goodbye, she whispered, Elizabeth used to say that sometimes we have to lose the family we were born into to find the family we were meant to have. Your journey isn't over, dear. It's just beginning. The morning after Ruth's visit, I woke with purpose for the first time in months. Her stories about my grandmother had shifted something fundamental in my perspective. If my grandmother had faced similar rejection and not only survived but thrived, perhaps I could too. I started with a letter to my parents. Not a pleading message seeking reconciliation at any cost, but a clear, firm statement of boundaries. I love you both and hope one day we can rebuild our relationship, I wrote. But that relationship must be based on mutual respect for my autonomy and choices. I am not using my grandmother's inheritance in any way that dishonors her memory, quite the opposite. I will not apologize for living my own truth, but my door remains open when you're ready to accept me as the adult I am, not the child you wish I still were. I sent copies to both their email addresses and their physical address, not expecting a response but needing to reclaim my narrative. Next, I made an appointment with a therapist specializing in family estrangement. Dr. Levine helped me understand that my parents' reaction, while painful, reflected their own fears and rigidity rather than any failing on my part. Your parents are experiencing what we call an extinction burst, she explained during our second session. Their control methods aren't working anymore, so they're escalating dramatically, hoping to force compliance. Your continued independence threatens their worldview. Understanding the psychology didn't lessen the pain, but it helped me stop internalizing their rejection as evidence of my unworthiness. The weekly therapy sessions became anchors in my new routine, safe spaces to process my grief without being consumed by it. With Ruth's mentorship, I refocused on my business with renewed determination. She introduced me to Sophia Chen, a sustainable fabric supplier who offered favorable terms for my first small production run. She connected me with Marcos Diaz, a pattern maker who believed in ethical fashion and agreed to work within my limited budget. My business, which I renamed Elizabeth Honor as a tribute to my grandmother, began taking tangible shape. I converted half my small living room into a studio, pinning designs to the walls and learning to sew prototype garments on a second-hand machine. The inheritance, which I'd been almost afraid to touch during my months of depression, now fueled careful, strategic investments in my company. Ruth reviewed my business plan with the sharp eye of someone who'd built and sold 2 successful companies, helping me refine my targets and timelines. "You're not just selling clothes," she reminded me during one of our weekly strategy sessions. "You're selling values. Make sure every decision, from your supply chain to your marketing, reflects those values authentically." As spring bloomed, so did my personal life in unexpected ways. I joined a support group for adults experiencing family estrangement, finding solace in the stories of others who understood this particular form of grief. The group met every Thursday evening in a community center downtown, sharing strategies for holidays, handling mutual acquaintances, and building chosen families. "Blood makes you related," said Miguel, a 50-something man who'd been estranged from his parents for refusing to enter the family business. "Love and respect make you family. You get to choose the second kind." The group became part of my emerging support network, along with Amelia, who remained steadfast despite my earlier withdrawal, and new friends like Sophia and Marcos who shared my passion for ethical fashion. I created new traditions to replace the family ones I'd lost. Sunday evenings, once devoted to my parents' dinner table, became Studio Sundays, days dedicated to creativity and self-care. I invited friends over to craft, cook, or simply share a meal without the weight of obligation or performance that had characterized my family dinners. As Easter approached, the holiday that had once loomed as a painful reminder of my exclusion, I hosted my first chosen family brunch, filling my small apartment with the warmth of friends who accepted me exactly as I was. 3 months into my renewed focus on Elizabeth honor, I received an unexpected text from Ryan. "Can we meet? Just us." Important. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop halfway between his office and my apartment, far from our parents' usual haunts. When I arrived, I barely recognized my brother. He'd lost weight, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. "They don't know I'm here," he said immediately after our awkward hug. "Dad would lose it if he knew." "How are they?" I asked, surprised by how much I still cared despite everything. Ryan sighed heavily. "Not good, to be honest. Mom cries a lot. Dad's even more controlling and critical than before. It's like losing you broke something fundamental in the family system, and they don't know how to fix it except by doubling down on control." "I'm sorry you're caught in the middle," I said sincerely. "That's not fair to you." "I feel trapped," he admitted. "I love them, but I'm seeing them differently now, seeing how they treat me differently now that you're gone. Dad's expectations for me have become impossible since you left. It's like he's transferring all the pressure he used to put on both of us just onto me now." As we talked, Ryan revealed that our parents were struggling more than their social media presence suggested. My mother had been prescribed anti-anxiety medication. My father was working longer hours, avoiding the now quiet house. They maintained the fiction of the perfect family to their friends, but behind closed doors, my absence was a wound they couldn't acknowledge without admitting their role in creating it. "They miss you," Ryan said, "but they're too proud to admit they overreacted. Dad especially. He's convinced that if he holds out long enough, you'll come back on his terms." "And you?" I asked. "Where do you stand in all this?" My brother looked down at his coffee cup, then met my eyes with newfound resolution. "I'm going to start therapy. Watching what happened with you made me realize I've been living my life to please them too. I don't want to wake up at 30 and realize I've never made a decision for myself." As we parted with a fierce hug, Ryan whispered, "I'm proud of you, Mads. For standing your ground. For building something new. Don't give up." Those words, from the one remaining bridge to my former life, fortified my determination. I wasn't just surviving my parents' rejection. I was building something meaningful from its ashes. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but for the first time I was confident it was mine to forge. A year after that fateful Sunday dinner, Elizabeth Honor launched its first full collection, a carefully curated selection of sustainable basics made from organic cotton, recycled polyester, and innovative fabrics created from agricultural waste. Ruth had connected me with a small but influential fashion blogger who specialized in ethical brands, resulting in a feature that brought our first significant wave of orders. The launch coincided with a profile in Sustainable Style, a national publication dedicated to environmentally responsible fashion. The article highlighted not just the clothes, but the values and story behind the brand. I hadn't mentioned my family estrangement to the journalist, focusing instead on my grandmother's inspiration, but the piece still captured the essence of my journey. Bradley has built Elizabeth Honor on the principle that integrity sometimes requires difficult choices, both in fashion and in life. As orders steadily increased, I hired my first 2 employees, Carmen, a skilled seamstress who had recently immigrated from El Salvador, and Dina, a marketing graduate who shared my passion for sustainability. My apartment studio quickly proved inadequate, leading to the rental of a small commercial space in an up-and-coming arts district. The business success brought financial stability I hadn't experienced since leaving my corporate job. More importantly, it validated the vision that had cost me so much. Each positive customer review, each reorder, each feature in Sustainable Fashion Roundups reinforced that I hadn't been foolish or irresponsible in pursuing this path. My personal life had stabilized as well. The support group remained a cornerstone of my emotional well-being. I'd begun dating again. Nothing serious, but enough to remind me that romance existed beyond my failed relationship with Jasper. Ryan and I maintained our secret connection, meeting monthly for coffee and occasional dinner when he could create believable excuses for our parents. I'd almost made peace with the permanent estrangement from my parents when fate intervened in the form of the annual Green Business Expo. Elizabeth Honor had been invited to exhibit as part of the Emerging Ethical Brands showcase. The opportunity was too valuable to pass up, despite the expo being held at the convention center in my hometown, the first time I'd returned since being disowned. I was arranging sample garments at our modest booth when I heard a familiar voice that made my blood run cold. "Roger, I want to look at the solar panel display over there." My mother. Which meant my father was with her. I froze, heart hammering in my chest. A year of therapy hadn't prepared me for this moment. I desperately scanned for escape routes, but before I could move, my mother turned and saw me. The shock on her face mirrored what must have been on mine. She looked older, somehow smaller than I remembered. My father, following her gaze, stiffened visibly when he spotted me. For an excruciating moment, we all remained motionless, separated by 20 feet of convention floor yet divided by a much greater distance. Then my mother took a halting step forward before my father caught her arm. They exchanged words I couldn't hear, and then, with one last long look in my direction, they turned and walked away. I made it through the remainder of the expo on autopilot, making connections and discussing sustainable production methods with a professionalism that belied my inner turmoil. Only Ruth, who had accompanied me as moral support, knew how deeply the encounter had affected me. "They saw you succeeding without them," she said as we packed up our display. "That's more powerful than any words could be." A week later, Ryan called with unexpected news. "Mads, I'm engaged. Alicia and I are getting married in the fall." After the congratulations and excited questions about his proposal to his longtime girlfriend, the reality set in. "So I guess I won't be invited to the wedding," I said, trying to keep the hurt from my voice. "Actually, that's the other thing I wanted to talk about," Ryan said hesitantly. "I told Mom and Dad that having you at my wedding is non-negotiable. It's caused some friction." "Ryan, I don't want to cause problems for your wedding day." "You're my sister," he interrupted firmly. "You belong at my wedding more than half the guest list they're pushing for." "But there's more. The family therapist Alicia and I have been seeing suggested a pre-wedding family counseling session. To, avoid drama on the actual day." "Family therapy? With Mom and Dad?" The idea seemed impossible. "They agreed," Ryan said, his tone suggesting he was as surprised as I was. "I think seeing you at the expo rattled them. Plus, they're terrified of Alicia's family witnessing our dysfunction and judging them." Which is how, 2 weeks later, I found myself sitting in Dr. Marshall's comfortable office, face to face with my parents for the first time in over a year. The initial minutes were excruciating. My father sat rigidly on the couch beside my mother, who kept dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Ryan and Alicia sat between our parents and me, a physical buffer in the emotional minefield. Dr. Marshall, a serene woman in her 50s, began by establishing ground rules: no interrupting, no personal attacks, focusing on I statements rather than accusations. Then she asked each of us to express what we hoped to gain from the session. "I just want my family whole for my wedding," Ryan said simply. My father cleared his throat. "I want to understand why Madison turned her back on everything we taught her, everything we provided for her." The familiar framing that I was the one who had rejected them, rather than the reverse, sparked anger I thought I'd processed. "I didn't turn my back on you," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "You kicked me out. You said I was a stranger." "Because you were throwing your life away," my father countered, color rising in his cheeks. Dr. Marshall intervened smoothly. "Mr. Bradley, remember our agreement about I statements. Perhaps rephrase to express how you felt about Madison's choices?" My father struggled visibly before saying, "I felt betrayed when Madison quit her job and started making decisions that went against everything we'd worked for." "And Madison, how did you feel when your parents reacted to your choices?" Dr. Marshall prompted. "Devastated," I said, tears welling despite my determination to remain composed. "I felt like your love was conditional on me living exactly the life you prescribed. Like the real me wasn't acceptable or worthy of your support." My mother made a small, wounded sound. Over the next 2 hours, layers of hurt, expectation, and misunderstanding were cautiously peeled back. My mother finally spoke, her voice quavering. "I was jealous," she admitted, shocking everyone in the room, including, it seemed, my father. "You had the courage to chase your dreams, Madison. I never did. I wanted the life I have," she added quickly, glancing at my father, "but there were other things I wanted too, creative things, that I set aside to be a wife and mother. Seeing you refuse to make those sacrifices, it made me question my own choices. It was easier to be angry than to face that." My father stared at his hands for a long moment before speaking. "I was afraid," he said, each word seemingly pulled from deep within him. "Afraid you'd fail. Afraid you'd get hurt. Afraid our family was falling apart. I don't know how to support choices I don't understand." It felt like losing control. "I never wanted to hurt either of you," I said. "I just needed to be true to myself, to honor Grandma's belief in me. I wanted you to be proud of me for that, not despite it." We didn't resolve everything that day, or in the 2 follow-up sessions before Ryan's wedding. There were moments of heated words, tears, and lingering resentments. But bridges, however fragile, began to form across the chasm that had separated us. For Ryan's wedding, we reached a careful truce. We would all attend, be civil, and focus on celebrating his happiness rather than dwelling on our conflicts. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was a beginning. As I watched my brother exchange vows with Alicia, my mother seated stiffly beside me in the family pew, I felt something shift, not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the possibility of it. The understanding that even broken family bonds might, with care and time, begin to heal. Ryan and Alicia's October wedding unfolded with the golden-hued perfection of a magazine spread. The historic stone church filled with fragrant autumn flowers, the reception at a renovated barn strung with fairy lights, the couple's evident joy, it all created an atmosphere where even long-standing family tensions seemed momentarily suspended. I adhered carefully to our agreed boundaries, maintaining polite distance from my parents during the ceremony. But as guests moved to the reception, an unexpected moment cracked the carefully constructed facade. My mother, struggling with the clasp of her necklace in the ladies' room, caught my eye in the mirror. "Could you?" she asked, gesturing helplessly at the delicate chain. Such a small thing, my fingers working the tiny clasp, her familiar perfume bringing a rush of childhood memories, our eyes meeting in the mirror as I fastened the jewelry. Yet in that mundane interaction lay the seeds of something like normalcy. "You look beautiful today," she said softly as I stepped back. "So do you, Mom," I replied, surprised by the lack of strain in my voice. Later, during the father-daughter dance, I stood at the edge of the dance floor watching Ryan guide our teary-eyed mother through a waltz. A presence beside me made me turn. "The business seems to be doing well," my father said, eyes fixed on the dancers. I looked up some articles about it. "Not quite an olive branch, but perhaps a twig." "It is," I answered. "We're expanding into a children's line next spring." He nodded, still not looking at me. "Your grandmother would be proud." The words, so simple yet so validating, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Before I could respond, he'd moved away to chat with Alicia's uncle. But something had shifted, imperceptibly but undeniably. 2 weeks after the wedding, Ryan called with surprising news. "Mom wants to know if you'd consider coming to dinner." "Not Sunday dinner," he clarified quickly. "Just a regular weeknight dinner." "At a restaurant," he added, correctly anticipating my hesitation about returning to their house. That first dinner was excruciating, stilted conversation about safe topics, careful avoidance of anything contentious, the weight of a year's estrangement sitting heavily on the table between us. But it happened. And then, a month later, it happened again. Slowly, a new pattern emerged. Monthly family dinners, always at neutral restaurants. My father asking cautious questions about Elizabeth Honor's business model. My mother gradually sharing more about her life, including, surprisingly, a watercolor class she'd started taking. "I always wanted to paint," she admitted during our third dinner. "I used to sketch in college, before I met your father." "You never told me that," I said, genuinely surprised. She smiled faintly. "There are many things we never told each other, it seems." The business continued to thrive alongside these tentative steps toward family reconciliation. Elizabeth Honor's commitment to sustainability attracted a devoted customer base, and our small team expanded to 7 employees. Ruth remained a trusted advisor, though increasingly I found confidence in my own business instincts. Personal growth paralleled professional success. The therapy I'd begun during my darkest days evolved from crisis management to deeper exploration of my identity beyond family roles. The support group remained important, now with me often in the role of offering hope to newer members still raw from family ruptures. I even began dating again, meaningfully this time, with Gabriel, a kind environmental engineer who understood both my passion for sustainability and the complicated family dynamics I navigated. Unlike Jasper, he didn't expect quick resolution or simple forgiveness, having weathered his own family conflicts years earlier. "Healing doesn't mean returning to what was," he said one evening as I fretted about an upcoming holiday gathering with my parents. "It means creating something new that honors the truth of what happened while making space for what might be." That wisdom guided me as I continued rebuilding connections with my family. We would never return to the Sunday dinners of my childhood. My parents would never fully understand or embrace all my choices. But we were learning to create a new relationship based on adult respect rather than parental authority. The most unexpected development came nearly 2 years after my disownment, when my father called me directly, still a rare enough occurrence to cause immediate anxiety. "I'm considering a partial retirement," he said without preamble. "Stepping back to 3 days a week at the firm." I thought, well, your mother mentioned you're looking for someone with financial expertise for Elizabeth Honor's expansion. It took me a moment to understand what he was suggesting. "Dad, are you offering to help with my business?" "Just consulting," he clarified quickly. "A few hours a week. If you think it would be useful." The Madison of 2 years ago would have rejected this offer immediately, seeing it as an attempt to control or undermine my vision. The Madison who had weathered rejection and rebuilt herself recognized it for what it was, my father's awkward attempt at connection through the language he understood best, business. "I think that could work," I said carefully. "We should set clear parameters." And so another bridge formed, my father's financial acumen helping strengthen Elizabeth Honor's foundation while giving him insight into the business he had once dismissed. He never became fully comfortable with the sustainable fashion world, but he developed genuine respect for the business model I'd created. My mother, too, found ways to connect with my new life, volunteering to help at our booth during the next Green Business Expo, a full circle moment that neither of us acknowledged explicitly but both felt deeply. 3 years after being told to consider myself a stranger, I hosted Thanksgiving dinner in my new home, a small but charming house I'd been able to purchase as Elizabeth Honor prospered. My parents attended, as did Ryan and Alicia, now expecting their first child, Ruth, Gabriel, and several friends who had supported me through the darkest times. As we gathered around the table, so different from the rigid formality of my childhood Thanksgivings, I realized how profoundly the painful rupture had transformed not just my relationship with my parents, but my entire understanding of family and belonging. My grandmother had been right all along. Living my truth had cost me dearly but had ultimately led to a life of authenticity and purpose that would have been impossible had I continued suppressing my dreams to maintain family approval. The relationships that survived and evolved, and the new connections formed along the way, were stronger for being chosen rather than merely inherited. The family gathered around my Thanksgiving table was bound by mutual respect and acceptance rather than obligation and conformity. As I looked around at these beloved faces, I silently thanked my grandmother for her final gift, not just the inheritance that had funded my business, but the courage to honor my own path, even when that path led through heartbreak. Family, I had learned, can be both biological and chosen. Love should never require the sacrifice of authenticity. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting boundaries. And sometimes, the most painful ruptures create space for the most meaningful growth. For those of you watching who may be struggling with family expectations or conditional acceptance, I hope my story offers some comfort. The journey isn't easy, and reconciliation isn't always possible or even desirable. But I promise you this, honoring your truth, however difficult, opens the door to connections based on who you really are, not who others want you to be. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between family expectations and your own truth? Share your experiences in the comments below, and remember to like, subscribe, and share if this story resonated with you. Thank you for witnessing my journey, and may you find the courage to honor your own, whatever form it takes.